Welcome to Engaging ESG, where we consider, challenge, and celebrate the evolving world of environmental, social, and governance communications, all in an increasingly complex landscape. I'm Jennifer Owens, marketing executive and consultant.
And I'm Kati Callens, Global Head of Sustainability at Adobe. For Season 4, we're once again talking with climate leaders who are shaping the present and future of sustainability messaging. From connecting with stakeholders to crafting compelling impact stories, we're uncovering the strategies that worked and learning from those that didn't.
Whether you're a seasoned pro or new to the field, you'll find practical tips and insights in every episode.
And whether you're working on your first sustainability report or reimagining your organization's climate narrative, these conversations will help you navigate the complexities of ESG communications. Let's get started.
Kati, I am so very glad to be back on a working mic with you.
Woohoo!
So this week has been very cold, but I am very heated up in trying to deal with tech issues. So how are you doing?
Well, Mercury is in retrograde. So yes, the technology issues continue, but nevertheless, we persist. I'm really happy to be here chatting with you and ramping up our conversations with really special guests in Season 4. As we all know, there's so much going on every day, almost hour by hour in our field. It can really feel overwhelming at times.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I feel like I need these experts, like this is my therapy session and my classwork to find out what's going on, to suss out like how we should be thinking about it, make me think in new ways and the like. And then how to bring all this thinking to our companies and to our clients. So yes, I need their help.
Definitely. On that note, I think we should introduce our guest.
Oh, I'm on it. Today, we're joined by Michael Neuwirth, a communications veteran who has spent more than 3 decades at the intersection of corporate reputation, sustainability, and stakeholder capitalism. Michael has built what he calls a portfolio career, which is a phrase that I will be stealing, and maybe I already have. His work spans comms consulting, angel investing, and advising companies on how to navigate the transformation from shareholder primacy to stakeholder-first business models. And among his many roles, he has spent 20 years plus at Danone, rising to Senior Director of External Comms and led communications for the American Sustainable Business Council as their first Chief Communications Officer. And now he's co-lead of the Executive Forum Angels, where he's investing in and advising sustainability-focused startups, which is something we're going to learn about today, too. So let's get at it. Michael, welcome to Engaging ESG.
I am so happy to be with you, and welcome to Season 4.
Oh,
yes.
Thank you so much.
We're happy to be here. Yeah, big welcome, Michael. You've had such an incredible career. Excited to learn from you today. And in particular, you've worked across many different sectors, which I always find fascinating as someone who's gotten to bounce around a little bit. So you've worked across agencies, corporations, nonprofits for over 30 years. And we'd love to kick it off by knowing a little bit more about how have you seen sustainability communications evolve during that time? And where do you think many companies and organizations are still getting it right or maybe have room for improvement?
I don't want to make it sound like I'm older than I am, but what hasn't changed in sustainability and communications? Because when I started the practice, really in a communications role, very traditional background, we were doing company good. And so it was called corporate social responsibility. And at the time, it was things like chairman projects as opposed to business priorities. First thing that's changed is that sustainability is now increasingly and hopefully forever embedded in business practices and embedded in business strategy. And that has not always been the case. So that is a major plus because we're using those instincts that people have to be good, to be better people, and channeling that into corporate priorities, which, in my opinion, long-term will have an impact on less extractive practices. So fewer or less extractive practices. The second thing I would say is that who's involved really matters more today than it did back in the dinosaur era. And by that, I mean, sustainability, when done right, is today so much more of an enterprise practice as opposed to a siloed practice. And by siloed practice, I mean back to that CEO's pet charity. And what's the golf outing that's going to support? Pick a charity. They didn't care what the charitable beneficiary was. They cared about the golf outing. I mean, that really is a dramatic example of what used to be. But that was the pinnacle of corporate social responsibility in the 1980s and 90s. And it wasn't really until the 2000s that we started to come into what I'll call a more modern era that focused on why this matters. And then I think obviously the pendulum has swung far the other way, because we are now living in a world where there are things like what I call certification soup. There's a certification for every business practice, every point of differentiation that a company seeks to make versus its competitors, regardless of the vertical that they're in. So I think those three things, and probably the last thing that's really evolved significantly during my career, is the urgency. 30 plus years ago, there was no urgency to corporate social responsibility. If anything, it was a reactive practice to a damaged reputation. And as climate change and the risks related to climate change and social risks unrelated to climate change, but related to people, as consciousness grew, there became a certain sense of urgency that companies have and must have a role to play in that. And now I think we're seeing less urgency in the last 3 or so years for a variety of reasons. But that pendulum swing of urgency has moved dramatically. And I'm fascinated by that and how it reflects public culture and business priorities.
Well, and I wonder, with all this, is it too much of an onus and a weight on these programs then? Because when no one was paying attention, in a sense, and that it was about the outing, and you make me laugh because I remember a big deal at one magazine I was at that we made the pitch that the golf outing, not everyone likes golf. So could we do like a spa day? This was in fashion. And so, and it was like, whoo. And then immediately a whole bunch of people wanted to spend the days getting their toes done, which was lots of fun. But that was the event that brought people together. But it was a hegemony of the golf outing. And so now people are paying attention. There is an urgency. There are certificated, like you just hear all these things and you just think of the poor person that's under it trying to hold it all up. And then you add the whole, it's a business case. What's your business case for everything that you're doing? And so is there any hope for the comms professional person who's standing in this maelstrom around them to, I don't know, all the phrases, bridge the gap, make the connection, I don't know. You hear me, because you hear the stress that I feel about all this.
I do think there's a lot that the comms professional can do. The first thing, and probably the most important thing, is don't operate in a comms environment. Operate in a business context. So when communications professionals or counselors outside of a company think about the role that they're playing, it's often in, oh no, I work in the comms moment. It's a disservice to the value that the professional can bring, and it's a disservice to the organization that's seeking a better sustainability profile. I think it's a real problem in the comms universe because there isn't a lot of proper, what I'll call air quote, proper education for communications. The practitioners self-define. And there's a hesitance, there isn't enough claiming my space in the room and not asking to be in a decision-making room, but expecting to be in a decision-making room. And if you're a communications professional who's asking to be in a decision-making room, I don't think you should be a communications professional.
Wow. I love it.
I love a hot take.
Yeah, I love a hot take.
Let's bring in some hot take verbiage on that note. So I think we're coming off of Climate Week, obviously, and just like general sustainability conference season. And a lot of what my colleagues were talking about was the world of greenwashing and also the world of green hushing. So I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about where you're seeing companies maybe not share their story as much, or how to share authentically, especially with all the work that you do advising companies in this space.
Well, I think a lot of companies, rightfully so, are always scared of a gotcha moment. And they're hesitant to engage in conversations, particularly now, if you're working in a space where diversity of any kind is important in your organization, then there's a lot of hesitation to be proactive and visible in that area. But so I think that avoiding that gotcha moment from stakeholders is entirely doable. Most NGOs, we think of, all right, who's going to gotcha, right? So it's going to be the NGO. And I guess in some cases, it can be a governmental organization today, which is a really sad state of affairs, in my opinion. But just focusing on the NGOs, in my experience, there are some the extremist NGOs which aren't really interested in having productive dialogue with their stakeholders. So I think the most important thing that comms professionals can do when they're thinking about avoiding that gotcha moment is setting the relationship up for success by defining, here's what we think we can do, here's what we think we can move our practices towards, and here's what we can't. And just being transparent up front about that. And, in my dairy industry days, we had some pioneering conversations with anti-dairy organizations, whereas the rest of the industry was head down, we're going to put our trade association out front on that one. We as a company at the time were much more progressive in our approach. We knew that, for example, anti-dairy organizations, anti-animal or pro-animal rights organizations like People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, we knew that they were fundamentally opposed to what our business model was based upon, which in their mind was the enslavement of cows. So if I know that the person threatening me, they want us out of business, and we are telling them we're not going out of business, we know that those areas we're going to park. And so you find partners who can maturely look for room for negotiation in what's flexible, what practices can be changed that improve from the NGO's perspective, in this case, the quality of animal welfare. So even though we're not going to be in the cow freeing business, right, which is what they want, we can learn from what their priorities are and have productive dialogue and avoid those gotcha moments. But that's precarious work. It's not without risk. But I firmly believe that everything in business, most things in business that are progressive, that define markets, that define points of differentiation, they do take risk. If you're not taking a risk, you're always going to be like others. And so I think that's where communications professionals need to be clear about, look, we are in a risky environment and we have to take risk as comms pros. Our job is not always to navigate to the safe and sound. That's part of it sometimes. I'm not, don't get me wrong that I'm a risk seeker, but I'm a risk taker.
Which is a wonderful segue into becoming an investor, which is what I would love to talk about, because you've expanded your portfolio to go into angel investing into sustainability focused businesses, which, some of them have big dreams. I've worked for a bunch of them, and that is a roller coaster ride. So tell me how you got into this, what prompted this, and then how all of this that you're talking about, major companies and how they're assessing risk and risk taking, is informing the work you're doing now with these small guys, these new guys.
Well, I think like most people, I've always been attracted to the cuteness and the potential that babies show, right? who's not attracted to the big eyes and that look up?
I'm going to let you keep going, see where this goes.
And when I was working for big companies, I thoroughly enjoyed working with some of the startups that we would invest in and nurturing them. We would share best practices with them. We would invest in early stage companies because big companies don't do crazy innovation really well. They often are better at buying ideas from people who are willing and able to take bigger risks. And part of my role at leading communications for a big company was advising those CEOs on how they work. So when I left big company communications, I was just attracted to working with entrepreneurs in small companies. And so I had always been, or have always been, a very diligent saver and a pretty, I guess, a decent investor. So I had, over the course of my career, built a financial portfolio that allowed me some financial independence. And so I decided I wanted to continue my work with founders and start investing in small startups. And so I've been doing that for now 4 years, built a portfolio that comprises 14 startups. And it's in a variety of different areas. I know the food and beverage industry really, really well. But as you alluded to, Jen, I'm really attracted more to businesses that are seeking to be less extractive, more socially beneficial, and have high prospects for growth. And so I'm agnostic to industry. So everything from providing pads on a roll in the same way that toilet paper is provided. Period equity is a major issue for girls in education, but it's also just a pain in the butt, so to speak, when you're caught without what you need. And so Egal is a company that I invested in 2 years ago, which is doing phenomenally well. And they're bringing literally pads on a roll next to toilet paper in women's stalls and bathrooms around the world. And yeah, that has a great impact on girls who are prevented from going to school or caught in moments that may impact their education. But it also has a much bigger impact because it's a gender equity issue, in my opinion. So they're doing great. That's an example of one. Upcycled foods would be another. How do we take waste in the food system and turn it into high value products? So I'm really looking for founders who are seeking less extractive practices, high growth, and they're obviously taking big risks. And they need advice from comms pros. And I'm happy to work with them. It's exhilarating. I love it.
Yeah. And it also sounds like you're focusing on organizations that have intersectional benefits. I think so often in the climate space, right, there's also social ramifications. And so I can imagine that being a pivot point for you to really focus on organizations that are meeting multiple kind of points of support for these communities, as well as developing meaningful products. So another question on the portfolio side. So you mentioned Spare Food Co.'s upcycled food platform. We also know that you support Attitude's sustainable fabrics. Would love to hear a little bit about kind of what the role of authentic storytelling plays in your investment decisions, and if there's any communication red flags that you try to keep aware of as you're thinking about organizations to invest in.
Only with your question did it make me realize how critically important authentic storytelling is to early stage companies. I'd never really considered this, but your question makes me realize that when you're in a very early stage of a company, often you have a vision for what you want to do, and you have some initial progress that you've made. But the rest of it is held together with, you may have a prototype of a product. You may have a sense of who are your supply chain partners. You may have a sense of what is your go-to-market strategy. So the fabric, the glue that holds that all together is the story. And it's obviously the experience and the value that the entrepreneur brings. But entrepreneurs with great ideas and all those other things, supply chains and customer plans and all that, a great entrepreneur without a good story is never going to make it. They're just not going to make it, because the great entrepreneur needs to be able to convey that here's my vision, and there's evidence behind my story. There's enough traction and I'm not saying complete traction, enough traction to convince some investor who's willing to take a risk on you to believe your story and the proof points you've established thus far. That is all about storytelling. And I love that, as a comms pro, I never thought about that. I've been doing this angel work for a bunch of years now. And I always thought about it. Is it the entrepreneur? Is it the early signs of traction? Is it their advisory board? But the story is like the glue. It is the fabric, that pieces that can fill gaps, but also keeps the whole thing moving.
Well, and then they try to put it into a frame of like the bigger problems and the thing. And so how do you do it without being depressing? Like this is our tactical moment of this, because the charisma of the entrepreneur completely, a lot of it is on the individual and how they can express themselves. But how do you talk about these big issues that they're trying to tackle? Like take the girls in my diversity work. We also worked a lot on the discrimination around periods. It could be a little depressing and overwhelming when you put the numbers to it. And so like, how do you do it without bringing us all down? Or do we have to bring us all down?
No, I don't think you need to present a dire consequence in order to inspire action and investment. I think you have to take advantage of what your audience already knows, and whether they're a believer or not. Even if you don't believe in climate change, you know that there are risks associated with adverse weather. I don't have to believe in climate change to the extent that, the world's going to be over in 20, fill in the date. But I know that hurricanes can really damage my boat. I don't have a boat, but you get the idea. And we are experiencing more severe and more frequent weather incidents that have economic and other. So you have to know, everyone doesn't have to be on the same page about belief systems in order to know that. So I think the opportunity is to focus appropriately on the problem, but disproportionately focus on the solution. And because people know the problem, whether they believe for the same reasons or not that you see the problem as a problem, they know that there may be solutions for which I don't have to believe in climate change in order to know that I want to protect my boat better. And I'm making this up on the fly, so it's actually sort of an interesting analogy, but it's not perfect analogy. So I apologize for that. But you get the idea.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it makes me think a bit about a word play that I heard at GreenBiz recently, which is, think about ESG as delivering value, and think about, sustainability as also potentially risk. Like, how are we thinking about these different pieces? And to your fictional boat, which I hope I get invited to at some point, it would be lovely to go out on the water together. I think there's also, we can take the boat metaphor further, right? Like, if we are doing this work to support communities and also to deliver value to these new innovative organizations, like those tides raise all boats, right? Like there's different ways of supporting different consumers, as well as, I think, just bringing back this topic around the human storytelling piece. I hear you saying that as well. We often talk about the fact that like, it's really hard to like pitch for a ton of carbon, but when you have the people that you're helping and those individual stories, that human to human connection, I think is the shift I'm starting to see more and more in the sustainability comms world.
I'm happy you mentioned that, because I was just working with a client a few months ago on sustainability report. And the fascinating part of it was that they felt like they didn't have a lot to report. And so my role was help them identify, what can we point to? And they were doing a lot more than they give themselves credit for. And this is a company that was very much focused on environmental, natural ecosystem preservation. And so they didn't they through the process realized that what they were doing by sequestering land and preserving and improving the biodiversity of the lands that they were keeping out of development is massive. So, sometimes I think you don't have to look that far. You just have to look carefully and through a different lens to find what may resonate. And that proof point actually resonates really well with their consumer audience.
Right.
So,
yeah. If it's authentic, the whole point we've been talking about, it's transparent. You can show what you're actually doing and showing some impact and the journey you're on. Because you didn't solve for all the problems with the land. Right. You were on a journey. And then it ties back into what they do as a business. They're not building boats and doing period pads. It's because that's not part of their story. That if it all comes back to it authentic and transparently, then of course it does. So.
Totally.
For sure. So as we wrap up the conversation, we'd love to hear from you, Michael, a bit. How are you taking care of yourself? I think within this space of being a climate professional, it's always good to think about ways that you're filling your own cup. And so
what are you reading? What are you thinking about? Yes.
Yeah. What's in your earbuds?
Wow. So to keep myself mentally and emotionally happy, I'm always reading. I'm a huge nonfiction reader and periodical reader. I don't think people call them periodicals anymore.
I do.
But so, yeah, huge consumer of news. And I'm always cooking. Cooking is a huge cathartic release for me. And I love serving people. So that kind of ticks 2 boxes. And then I'm running. I'm a huge outdoorsy fan. So running and or playing tennis at least four times a week. And that keeps me fairly grounded. What's buzzing in my ears? I am a fan of nostalgia. So for those fans or anyone who grew up in New York City in the 1980s, there's a weekly podcast that I love called Desperately Seeking the 80s, which is a little bit of a vice for me because it's a reliving of a childhood that I hold very dear. But then I'm also listening to things like the Scott Galloway podcast, Prof G, and because I'm a marketer and anyone who's founded 3 businesses and then gone on to become a college professor earned my attention. Don't always agree with Prof G, but definitely love him. And what else? I don't know. Watching really interesting dystopic shows on Netflix and Apple.
Oh no.
Well, I love dystopic stories. Like, I don't know if y'all are watching this one that just started, Pluribus.
No, I've seen the ads everywhere, but no.
It's mind-bending, but I'm not going to, everything I'm going to say about it is a spoiler alert, so I'm not going to say anything about it. But what the whole genre I enjoy about the genre, and Black Mirror is another one, is that it helps me to relax by reframing what society could be like.
Wow. Okay.
So that might not sound relaxing to most people.
We are not judging, you're relaxing.
But it is kind of an out-of-body experience, or at least maybe an out-of-mind experience. I don't know which one. But I absolutely adore that. It's a pressure valve, a release valve for me. So love stuff like that. But highly recommend Pluribus.
Okay. I'm going to add it to the show notes so you guys can find it for our lovely listeners. And on that note, we thank you so much for joining us and leading us into thinking about the ways that that comms plays across everything. We really are the center of the work, I think. So that just may be me placing myself in the center of everything, but I appreciate you backing me up on that.
Well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be with you all, and good luck on the rest of season 4.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on Engaging ESG. Have a question for us to consider or a strategy you'd like us to cover? Email us today at engagingesg@gmail.com.
Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Engaging ESG today. It helps us grow, and even better, be sure to share the podcast with your favorite sustainability, diversity, or social impact colleague. And until next time, keep engaging.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.